At the bustling JFK airport, the air buzzed with the sounds of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and scattered conversations. The departure boards flickered overhead, announcing upcoming flights as travelers rushed through the terminals, eager to reach their destinations. Among them, a security officer walked with a steady gaze, his trained German shepherd trotting attentively by his side. The dog suddenly halted, ears perked, body tense. A deep, sharp bark cut through the noise, drawing immediate attention. The officer's heartbeat quickened as he followed the dog's lead, his eyes locking onto a lone black suitcase abandoned near a row of chairs in the waiting area. His training kicked in, no hesitation. He swiftly signaled to his team, his voice low but firm through the radio, *suspicious package. Terminal 4, near Gate 17. Initiate protocol. Within moments, additional security personnel converged on the scene, their movements precise and controlled. Passengers in the vicinity noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. Some turned their heads in curiosity, while others instinctively stepped back, sensing the growing tension. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering reassurances as she clutched his hand. A businessman, once engrossed in his laptop, now looked up, brows furrowed. The overhead lights reflected off the polished floor, casting long shadows as officers expanded the perimeter. The German shepherd stood rigid, growling softly, its instincts sharper than any human's. The officer knelt beside his partner, gently running a hand over the dog's back in a silent exchange of trust. Every second stretched as the weight of uncertainty pressed down on the terminal. Was it just a forgotten bag, or something far more dangerous? The answer lay just moments away, and every breath held in suspense. The tension in the air thickened as the security team sprang into action. The voice over the airport speakers crackled with urgency, attention, all passengers. Please remain calm and follow security instructions. Immediately, a wave of unease spread through the crowd. People instinctively stepped back, their eyes darting between the officers and the lone black suitcase that sat ominously in the middle of the terminal floor. The air felt charged, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. One of the security officers, a tall man with a rigid stance, tightened his grip on the leash of a German shepherd, its muscular body coiled with tension. The dog's ears were perked up, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air, sensing the anxiety that filled the space. The officer's pulse quickened. He had been in situations like this before, but the fear of the unknown always gnawed at him. Was this just another abandoned bag, or was there something far more dangerous inside? Within minutes, the bomb disposal unit arrived, moving with practiced precision. The lead technician, dressed in heavy protective gear, approached the suitcase cautiously. The seconds dragged into eternity as he pulled out a scanning device, the soft beeping sounds breaking the eerie silence. The officer holding the dog felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. His fingers twitched near his radio, ready to respond at the slightest sign of danger. Around him, the crowd remained frozen, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Some parents pulled their children closer, whispering reassurances they barely believed themselves. Time seemed to slow as the technician signaled to his team. A simple hand movement, but one that carried immense weight. Negative. No explosives detected. A collective exhale rippled through the terminal, but the officer remained stiff, his heart still hammering against his ribs. Slowly, another security team member stepped forward and, with careful hands, unzipped the suitcase. Inside, a jumble of clothes, a few toiletries, and a small stuffed bear. Someone's lost luggage. That was all. The officer let out a deep breath, running a hand down his face. The German shepherd, sensing the shift in energy, relaxed slightly, its ears flicking before it sat back on its haunches. Around them, the crowd began to stir. Murmurs spread, some people chuckling nervously, others shaking their heads at the unnecessary panic. A woman sighed in relief, pressing a hand to her chest, while a businessman muttered about the wasted time. Yet, as the security officer stood there, his pulse still gradually settling, he knew that this had been necessary. Every alert had to be taken seriously. Because in a place like this, where lives intersected in fleeting moments of arrival and departure, a single mistake, a single moment of hesitation, could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. The airport terminal was a blur of motion, but amidst the general bustle, a sudden burst of tension cut through the crowd. A young woman, her face pale and set with determination, stood near the departure gates, her figure tense and rigid as she argued with a security officer. Her deep blue coat was a stark contrast against the sea of other travelers, but it was her anxious energy that stood out most. Her hands trembled, gripping the strap of her bag with such force that her knuckles turned white. She glanced repeatedly at the departure board above, where her flight number flashed urgently in red, *final boarding call, time was slipping through her fingers like sand, and she could feel the weight of each passing second crushing her chest. Her voice, when she spoke, was a mix of desperation and pleading. "Please, you don't understand. I need to get on that flight," she said, her words coming out in rapid bursts, the fear in her tone evident. Her eyes darted nervously from the officer's unyielding face to the throngs of people moving past them, oblivious to her crisis. Every instinct in her screamed to push past the officer, to somehow slip through the crowd and board that flight, but she knew that would only make things worse. The officer stood firm, his expression unwavering as he responded with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen all types of stress in his career. "Ma'am," he said, his voice smooth but authoritative, "we need you to step aside and answer a few questions. Your bag triggered an alert during the screening process." He paused, his hand hovering near his radio, signaling that he was prepared for backup if necessary. His body language was calm but precise, he wasn't backing down. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, as though every movement she made was being measured against the clock. The woman's breath hitched, and for a brief moment, she felt a wave of dizziness. She had been through so much to get to this point: hours of travel, tight schedules, and the endless gnawing anxiety in the back of her mind. But this was different. She could feel the crushing pressure of the situation as if the world itself was closing in on her. Her heart hammered in her chest, and each beat seemed to drive home the reality of her fear. If she didn't get on that plane, everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, would be wasted. Around them, passengers began to slow, curious glances flickering in their direction. Some averted their eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding, while others openly observed, whispering among themselves. The woman felt the prickle of their eyes on her, but she couldn't focus on anything except the officer in front of her and the haunting call of her flight number. The officer stood unmoving, waiting for her to comply, his gaze never leaving her face. His presence was stern but not unkind, his voice steady as he continued, "Ma'am, please cooperate. This won't take long." His patience was beginning to fray, but she could see in his eyes that he was simply doing his job. And yet, she couldn't shake the suffocating sense of urgency that pressed against her ribs. Her fingers shook uncontrollably as she slowly unzipped her bag. Every action felt labored, as though her body were fighting against the rising tide of panic that threatened to overtake her. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly, each one more excruciating than the last. She was aware of every single movement, the cool metal zipper beneath her fingertips, the sound of her breath, the soft shuffle of feet as others passed by. The only thing that mattered in that moment was what lay inside her bag. She couldn't let them stop her now. She needed to get on that flight. As the zipper gave way, the officer's eyes flickered to the contents inside. His gaze softened just a fraction when he saw the old, worn leather-bound book nestled among the layers of clothing and personal items. Its edges were frayed, its gold lettering barely visible from years of use, but to her, it was a treasure beyond value. This was the last gift her grandfather had left her, a journal filled with his life's wisdom, his thoughts, his memories. It was the final piece of him, and she couldn't leave it behind. The officer took a step closer, his voice now softer, though still commanding. "What is this?" he asked, his tone shifting ever so slightly. Her heart skipped a beat. She had hoped they wouldn't question it, but now there was no turning back. She swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat, and answered, her voice trembling. "It's my grandfather's journal." He gave it to me before he passed away. I need to take it home. Please, you don't understand, it's all I have left of him." The officer studied her intently, and for a long moment, there was no sound but the low murmur of other passengers nearby. She held her breath, the weight of her words hanging between them. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Was he going to let her go, or would the rules be more important? Was there time to check it further? She wanted to scream, to beg him to understand, but she forced herself to remain calm, her body still as stone. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the officer exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "All right," he said, his voice quieter now. "We'll just run a quick check. If everything's clear, you'll be on your way." A flood of relief rushed through her body, but she couldn't let herself relax, not yet. She stepped back slightly, the weight of her bag feeling like 1,000 pounds in that moment. The officer carefully pulled out the journal, his hands gentle as he inspected it. Her gaze remained fixed on the clock above, each second passing in agonizing slowness. She could still hear the final call for her flight echoing through the terminal, the words almost mocking her as she waited, heart in her throat. Her entire world hung in the balance, and all she could do was hope that the officer's decision would come soon enough. The officer's presence felt like an impenetrable wall between her and freedom, each moment dragging on like an eternity. As he flipped through the pages of the journal, his face remained neutral, almost unreadable, but his sharp eyes scanned every word with meticulous care. The sound of the pages turning was loud in the silence, a harsh reminder of the fragile line between her and failure. She stood there, frozen, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Every instinct within her screamed to reach out, to explain, to break the silence, but she remained still, knowing there was nothing she could say that would change what was happening. Her heart was pounding in her chest, each beat feeling louder than the last, a constant reminder of the pressure mounting with every passing second. She could feel the sweat starting to bead on her forehead, the coldness of it trickling down her temple. It wasn't just the physical heat that was getting to her, it was the anxiety, the overwhelming sense that her entire future hinged on this moment. Every failed attempt to get through security in the past few weeks rushed back, her mind replaying the hours of stress, the canceled flights, and the mounting pressure of time running out. What if he found something? What if one of the pages, one of the notes she'd carefully written down, was misinterpreted? What if he decided to take the journal away and hold her for questioning? She had no idea what was inside her bag that might have flagged something, no idea what would be enough to make him stop her from getting on that flight. The very thought of losing this chance, her last chance, was too much to bear. With each passing second, her mind was spiraling. Her thoughts clashed against each other, a battle between reason and panic. She was so close to boarding the plane and putting everything behind her, the past, the mistakes, the missed opportunities. But now, standing in front of this officer, it felt like the door to her future was closing right in her face, and she had no control over whether she could stop it. She wanted to scream, to shout at him to hurry up, to let her go, but she knew better. Any sign of impatience, any flicker of frustration, could be the signal that she wasn't in control, that she wasn't calm enough to travel. So, she clenched her jaw instead, focusing on her breathing, trying to slow her racing heart. She felt the heat rising in her chest, the pressure of the moment almost too much to bear. Her throat was dry, her stomach in knots, but she fought to stay composed. She couldn't let him see how terrified she was. The officer's eyes flicked up from the journal to meet hers, his gaze sharp and calculating. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something. Was it pity? Disinterest? It was hard to tell. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She didn't care about his judgment, she cared only about getting to that gate, boarding the plane, and escaping the suffocating uncertainty that had clouded her life for so long. She could almost hear the voice of the gate agent calling the final boarding call, the announcement vibrating in her chest, urging her forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officer lowered the journal. His expression didn't change, but he seemed to consider something for a long moment, and then he spoke, his voice firm but without malice. "It's clear. You're free to go." Her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she thought she had imagined it. Was he really letting her go? Her mind raced to process the words, to make sure she hadn't misheard him. But there it was again, "You're free to go." The weight in her chest began to lift, just slightly, enough for her to breathe, but the air still felt thick with the remnants of fear. She didn't waste another moment. Without hesitation, she reached for the journal, her fingers trembling as she grabbed it, clutching it to her chest as though it were the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. Her legs felt shaky, but she steadied herself, willing her body to move, to put distance between her and the officer before she allowed herself to think too much about what had just happened. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft, fragile, as if saying it too loudly might shatter the delicate balance she had fought so hard to maintain. The officer gave a brief nod, his face impassive, but she could swear she saw the briefest flicker of recognition in his eyes, an understanding, perhaps, of how much this moment meant. She turned quickly, not daring to glance back, and moved toward the gate. Her steps were quick but purposeful, the urgency in her movements a reflection of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She didn't care about the noise around her anymore, the bustle of the airport, the other travelers, the distant sound of announcements. All that mattered was the gate ahead, the door that would lead her to the plane, to the safety of a new beginning. The final boarding call echoed faintly in her ears, but it was no longer a warning, it was a lifeline, a sound that filled her with hope, and she was determined not to let it slip away. Her heart pounded as she made her way through the bustling airport terminal. The bright lights and constant hum of chatter felt distant, as if she were walking through a dream. The weight of her decision, of what she was about to do, seemed to pull her in all directions at once. She felt a mix of disbelief and quiet determination, as though her body was betraying her emotions. Every step she took toward the boarding gate made it more real, yet she still couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong, that fate would pull her back. She passed the rows of passengers, some checking their tickets, others chatting amongst themselves, completely unaware of the storm that raged within her. The uncertainty was like a heavy cloud overhead, but underneath that cloud, there was something else, something fierce and quiet, like a spark in the dark. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when everything could change. She could already imagine herself stepping onto the plane, feeling the final barrier between her and her past fade away, piece by piece. Her hands were clammy, the coldness of the boarding pass a stark contrast to the heat rising from her palms. She was so close, yet the nerves still clawed at her insides. She didn't know whether she was excited or terrified, probably both, but she wasn't sure how to process the emotions swirling in her chest. Her mind kept spinning in circles, asking herself if she was making the right decision, if she was ready for what lay ahead. But every doubt, every whisper of fear, was drowned out by the growing certainty that this was her only chance to escape the life that had held her captive for so long. The final call echoed over the loudspeakers, and her heart skipped a beat. Her stomach tightened in response, a mix of dread and exhilaration. The end of her journey was now in sight. Her thoughts raced as she approached the gate, and the reality of what she was about to do began to settle over her. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was happening, it felt so surreal, so much more intense than she had ever expected. When she reached the gate agent, she forced her trembling hand to offer her boarding pass, the paper seeming to burn against her fingers. The agent took it without hesitation, scanning it quickly and handing it back with a casual, "Have a safe flight." The simplicity of the words felt like a contrast to the enormity of what was happening. A part of her wanted to scream, to say that this wasn't just a flight for her, it was freedom, a new beginning. But the words stuck in her throat, choked by the rawness of her emotions. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice small but firm. She offered a smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and she turned away from the counter. As she walked toward the jet bridge, she could feel the weight of the past still clinging to her, tugging at her like a chain. The life she had known, the struggles, the pain, everything she had tried to escape was there, just behind her. But as she stepped forward, each movement took her closer to something new, something better, something that could offer her a future where she could breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in a long while. The air in the jet bridge felt cooler, the quiet hum of the plane in the distance offering a strange comfort. She took another step, her breath hitching in her chest. It was real. She was almost there. She could see the plane now, its silver body gleaming under the harsh lights of the terminal. The door to the plane was just ahead, and with each step, her pulse quickened. She was leaving behind everything, but also stepping into the unknown, into a world of possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and yet, for the first time in ages, it felt like she was finally in control. As she neared the door, she paused for just a moment, looking back over her shoulder. For a brief second, she half expected someone to rush toward her, someone to stop her, to remind her of everything she was leaving behind. But there was no one. No one to stop her. The weight of her decision, heavy as it was, began to lift as she stepped onto the plane. She was truly free now. As the door closed behind her, sealing her in, she allowed herself one deep, steadying breath. The journey was far from over, but this moment was hers. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next.